Before Lisa Weiss spoke up, Doug Weiss and Joanie Lamb felt secure sharing their secrets. Unexpectedly, Lisa reveals devastating truths that could permanently break Doug and Joanie's relationship. Behind the scenes, there are affairs, betrayals, and clandestine movements. As a result of Lisa's disclosures, the Christian media landscape is changing dramatically. All of this goes beyond mere drama. Their meticulously built kingdom is on the brink of collapse in this last chapter. Listen closely because what Lisa says will stick with you. All those years ago, as a marriage counselor and model Christian husband, Doug Weiss was universally admired. He encouraged married people to stay together and love one another by appearing on television, giving sermons, and penning books. His audience applauded, believed, and took his counsel to heart. An obedient and faithful guy, Doug understood the importance of keeping one's marriage vows and providing for one's spouse. Lisa Weiss, his wife, sat at home feeling invisible and lonely as he stood on stages teaching people how to love their marriages. Lisa had been Doug's rock for 30 years, taking care of the household and their children as he built his ministry. She had faith in his purpose and the man she perceived him to be. As Doug was away on his trip, Lisa gathered the family close, hoping for some quality time together when he returned. On the other hand, he frequently returned home exhausted and preoccupied with plans for the following sermon, vacation, or book. Lisa hardly had the talk she craved, and the friendly looks she had lost never came back. When they had supper together, she would eat across from him, making an effort to communicate. She felt like a ghost in her own home since his mind was elsewhere. Although the isolation was painful, it wasn't the most difficult aspect for Lisa. It was witnessing her beloved spouse preach the virtues of husbands to the world as he failed to meet her gaze. His sermons on commitment and connection left her feeling invisible and unappreciated in the life they had created together. Lisa hoped that things would improve once Doug finished his next major assignment, so she told herself it was just a busy season. Nevertheless, the hectic seasons never ended, and their growing separation only deepened. People would compliment Doug on his intelligence and kindness, and Lisa would hear how fortunate she was to have a godly spouse like him. She would put on a gracious front, suppressing her emotions, knowing that all they saw was the version of Doug that he presented to the world. They had no idea how many nights she prayed in private, hoping God would mend her broken household. They failed to notice her valiant efforts to cling on, scheduling dates, making notes, pleading with Doug to take it easy and see her again. Lisa had a tougher time expressing her grief because Doug wasn't aggressive or overbearing. She receded into the background as he remained absorbed in his objective. For a while, Lisa questioned whether she was asking too much of her husband, if she deserved to be noticed, loved, and appreciated. Remembering when they were little, she reflected on, daydreaming about their future together, and pledging to prioritize one another no matter what. While Lisa was alone at home, she had a revelation. The man who had chosen her long ago had stopped seeing her. Their idyllic marriage had been a fantasy, she thought. I am being destroyed by him. No, Joni, something terrible has transpired, I adamantly declared. And here we are, dealing with an essay and everything, ouch. She proceeded to defend Pete. He has caused Pete immense pain. Yeah, that Pete, about whom Rebecca and JW sent that lengthy letter. It was this Pete that Rebecca. Even though Pete is a kind guy, JW won't let him into their house. According to her, Susie has a pathological linchpin in her character and had assaulted a decent man, a chiropractor, who is now deceased but has a record. So what Joni said to me shocked me. My plea was to her. I noticed that part of her and told her, please reconcile with Jonathan for yourself. That would be the hope. To put it simply, it's not at all like the Joni you see on TV. contrasted with that lovely individual. Yet I did notice. I was like, "What on earth are you talking about?" when she mentioned that individual in the video who was criticizing Jonathan. Jonathan wasn't running a smear campaign as far as I could see. My eyes had met Jonathan's. There had been years of Lisa Weiss attempting to maintain. All in one place. Things would improve, she thought, if she just kept praying, hoping, and supporting Doug. Their marriage, their vows, and the purpose they were creating together were all things in which she had faith. Doug had her trust. Regardless of the fact that he no longer saw her, returned home without batting an eye, or was physically there in the house, but mentally miles away. She tried to reassure herself that it was only a season at first. Hard at work for God, Doug assisted other married couples in restoring their marriages. She told herself that God would reward her patience since his work was important and worth the sacrifice. In the vain hope that he would rediscover her and they might rekindle their relationship, she would arrange for date evenings and send him casual letters. But Doug was restless, easily sidetracked, and perpetually planning his next move. Preaching, making an appearance on television, planning to assist the next marriage, or penning his next book. Lisa sensed a sense of isolation settling over her, like if a fog were slowly enveloping her heart. A piercing agony would stab through her whenever she would watch Doug on stage fervently preaching the gospel of love and faithfulness, exhorting husbands to treasure their wives. Internal organs. He never once preached to himself or her, but he did it to everyone else. As their family broke down behind closed doors, she would observe him preaching the value of family. On some evenings, Lisa would sob into the sink as she retreated to the bathroom, in order to avoid Doug's ears. After wiping away her tears, she would take a big breath, smile, and stroll out the door as if nothing had happened. She resisted admitting that she was breaking down because she was afraid it would reflect poorly on him, their ministry, and herself. Despite her reminding herself to remain resilient, she felt compelled to stand by him, no matter the cost to herself. However, the ambient noise intensified. Less and fewer moments of intimacy occurred. Subtle acts of kindness that had previously warmed her heart ceased to materialize. As a pastor, Doug would lead them in prayer, encourage them, and provide advice on how to pursue a marriage. Aside from the feelings of being hated and unseen, Lisa began to have the impression that she was sharing her home with an unfamiliar person, someone who resembled her husband but who had abandoned her, stopped caring about her, and stopped fighting for her. Lisa endeavored to raise her voice. She made an effort to convey to Doug her feelings of isolation, need for his presence, and need for his approval. As a sign that he understood, Doug would nod and make a pledge to improve. However, little altered. After that, he would disappear. Once more. Continuing on to the next gathering, conference, or sermon, abandoning Lisa to deal with the lingering weight of unfulfilled promises. Lisa was unbreakable at all times. Neglect came in the form of a steady trickle of little things that accumulated over time. It was the silent dinners, the constant ringing of Doug's phone, and his inability to look away from his notes, laptop, or phone while they were talking. It was the deceitful manner he could meet her gaze. His ability to articulate, "I love you," concealing it. It became increasingly apparent to Lisa that she was fading away. Under the weight of Doug's purpose and the continual pressure to support a guy who had long since ceased selecting her, she was losing sight of who she was. The person she once was, the one who joyfully rejoiced, who felt acknowledged, who felt cherished. She was now a ghost in her own life, merely existing, going about her daily business as usual, but with no real purpose or joy. Quietly, the breaking point arrived. It wasn't a tense or boisterous altercation. Doug returned home to an empty house that evening. He hardly noticed her before diving headfirst into his laptop. After preparing the meal, Lisa waited for him to come sit down with her. He arrived at last, but instead of enjoying the food she had prepared, he sat down and stared at his phone the whole time. He nodded absent-mindedly as he scrolled through his email, despite her attempts to initiate conversation. At that very second, Lisa felt a part of her rupture. She came to the realization that she couldn't continue living in denial, that she couldn't continue giving her life up for a man who never noticed her, never picked her, and never fought for her. A flood of sadness washed over her as she glanced across the table at Doug. Sorrow for the love they had lost, sorrow over the woman she had lost, and sorrow over the unfulfilled dreams. After Lisa realized her marriage was over, she went to bed that night in tears. Even though the connection had broken, Doug remained. A stranger with a familiar face had replaced the man who had hugged her tight and whispered dreams in the dark. On her alone, Lisa felt she couldn't salvage her marriage. It was impossible for her to be the sole fighter, the sole sacrificer, or the alone attempter. A calm determination awaited Lisa the following morning. It was time for her to quit acting, for her to quit. She needs to begin the process of self-discovery and begin disguising her anguish. She started going to therapy, writing down her feelings in a journal, and trying to figure out who she was apart from her marriage to Doug. On the same breath, it was liberating, terrifying, and agonizing. Her value, she came to understand, was unrelated to. She wasn't defined by her role as Doug's silent supporter, and neither was he. The turning point for Lisa came when she made the conscious decision to be herself again, to emerge from her shell, and speak up after years of silence. That was the moment she realized being faithful didn't imply giving up on yourself or sacrificing who you were to love another person. Disregard of the emotional realm. She embarked on a path to recovery, self-discovery, and a life of acceptance and love, not only from others, but from within herself. It seemed as if time stood still for Lisa Weiss the moment she learned of Doug's remarriage. She had prayed for and believed in this man for almost 30 years, and here he was standing next to another lady, smiling for pictures and telling the world about their new beginning. Not only did he move on, but everything happened so quickly. Doug wed again not long after Lisa signed the divorce papers. This time he married Joanie Lamb, a familiar face at Christian gatherings and conferences whom Lisa had known for years. From the outside looking in, it seemed like a touching tale of two Christian leaders who overcame adversity to find love. They received internet congratulations. There were many joyful photographs and hashtags commemorating the change of seasons and beginnings shared on social media, as members of various church communities shared their faith stories. On the other hand, Lisa took offense to every one of those images. Even though Doug and Joni were having a party, Lisa was still dealing with the breakup of her marriage, which she had battled so hard to prevent, and the daily silence that came with it. It wasn't only that Doug remarried so fast that was difficult. It was the fact that he had been preaching to people for a long time about the need of defending one's marriage, about the significance of being patient and faithful, of keeping promises even when they were difficult to keep. Those were the statements that Lisa had believed. She had put those words into practice by giving up her personal wants to fund Doug's ministry, which included speaking, traveling, and writing books to encourage people to love their husbands properly. Having remained at home they were building something eternal together, so they took care of the children, ran the household, and prayed for Doug. It seemed like all they had worked for was for nothing now. The man who devoted his life to encouraging couples to fight for their marriages seems to have moved on very fast. What the? While Lisa was left to pick up the pieces of her life and emotions, could he publish cheery images with Joni? It was as if he had betrayed not only Lisa, his wife, but also their shared ministry values. The speed with which it all happened was a topic of conversation, naturally took place. Those familiar with Lisa inquired about matters that she was unable to resolve. Were Doug and Joanie in communication prior to the finalization of their divorce? While Lisa prayed for a miracle to mend her marriage, was there a secret plot afoot? The timeline felt too tidy, too rapid, and too public to ignore, even though Lisa didn't want to believe it. Nights were spent reliving memories and trying to put a finger on when Doug began prioritizing Joanie over his existing family. Their wedding was even more heartbreaking because of how it was lauded in front of all. It was as though Doug and Joanie's story were a witness of God's goodness that they would share on television. While Lisa suffered in quiet, people who had prayed for her and Doug were now praising the newlyweds, completely oblivious to the anguish Lisa was experiencing. Accomplice, and a fresh front to offer to the public. As she and her children tried to make sense of their father's decision to build a new family so quickly after leaving theirs, she would come across blogs that lauded Doug and Joanie's marriage, describing it as divine timing. It wasn't a private betrayal. Claiming to value faith and family, it was celebrated in a public and boisterous manner. Late at night, Lisa would find herself feeling sick to her stomach whenever she scrolled through social media and saw images of Doug and Joanie beaming at ministry activities. The years she had spent standing next to Doug at comparable happenings, posing for pictures while genuinely thinking they were helping God as a team. Suddenly, she seemed to have been superseded, both in Doug's life and the ministry they had co-founded. Even the kids noticed. They could tell that something was off because of their age. Old enough to witness the happy images and headlines. Old enough to experience the bewilderment and pain of witnessing their father's rapid involvement with another woman. Lisa wished she could keep them safe and out of harm's way, but she couldn't. Everything in their life had crumbled, and no simple explanation could be offered for the man's sudden decision to create a new family, given his previous sermons on the subject. Despite her best efforts, Lisa could not shake the weight of betrayal. Doug wasn't the only one we lost. She felt like she was losing the foundation of a life they had been creating together. It was the disillusionment of abandoning the hopes and prayers they had cherished together, as well as her trust that God could mend their broken hearts. Seeing her life become a footnote while Doug embarked on a new chapter, embraced by the same community that had once rejoiced over their marriage, was the hardest part. At times, Lisa wondered if she was going insane, wondering whether her expectations were too high or if she was mistaken to feel wounded. Secretly, though, she was aware of the reality. There should never be an abandonment in love, and there should never be a substitution of one's swiftly between relatives. She had been on board with Doug's cause for a long time, thinking their sacrifice and dedication were significant. It seemed like nobody else believed that Lisa's quick marriage was anything more than a dead end at this point. It was an excruciating first steps in freeing herself from a partner who insisted on following his own path, even if it meant abandoning her. It was the first step on the road to rediscovering who she was, in order to see that her value was unrelated to Doug's decisions or his public persona. For a brief second, feeling profound sadness, but also a sudden realization that Lisa could not continue to exist in the background of another person's narrative. While the public betrayal was painful, it ultimately set her free. It made her realize that she should have been loved and appreciated just for being herself, and not because of the part she played in other people's lives. It showed her that there is always hope for a better future, even when everything around you seems to be falling apart. It gave her the strength to recover, find peace, and forge her own path. Due to Doug's hasty remarriage, Lisa Weiss ended up in an unexpected situation. She had spent decades creating a life for herself, but now there was only stillness and unanswered questions. The widow, who had been her husband's rock through thick and thin, was now left to pick up the pieces of her life on her own. Feeling as though her every breath was burdened with sorrow and bewilderment, she found it difficult to rise from her bed for weeks. Defending her marriage, praying for her loved ones, and having faith in God to mend broken things were all things Lisa had always believed in. She prayed night after night that Doug would remember her, reignite their romance, and return the love they once shared. Doug moved on after the divorce was finalized. All of a sudden, it seemed like her whole world had crumbled around her. She was utterly despondent, forsaken, and unheard. Lisa, though, started to comprehend in those peaceful moments that this was just the beginning of her tale. Things were quite minor at start. In order to make herself a cup, she would stand up of tea, as a gentle reminder that she was not gone, and that her life had meaning despite the changes. She began keeping a notebook in which she could release the pent-up emotions she had been suppressing for so long. Hurt, anger, and confusion. Little by little, her writing progressed toward finding her voice again. A voice that had been muted for so long because of the emphasis on others. Prayer time for Lisa also increased. All of a sudden, her prayers took on a new tone. After a while, she stopped asking God to return Doug in order to give back what was lost. God, on the other hand, had a different plan for her future, and she prayed for strength, healing, and the bravery to accept it. She prayed to God, asking Him to reveal her true identity apart from Doug, so she could rediscover herself after years of feeling lost. Outside of sight, Lisa found that releasing her guilt was a particularly challenging aspect of her recovery process. She had wallowed in self-pity for a long time, wondering if her demanding nature, lack of empathy, or other shortcomings were to blame for their marriage's demise. Lisa began to rediscover the things that had formerly brought her happiness as she began to rediscover herself. She was a mother who was present and purposeful when she spent time with her children, rather than a wife trying to keep the family together in the absence of her husband. She began going for walks and marveling at nature's splendor. She had previously ignored because she was either too sad or too preoccupied. Even though she was in pain, the sun's warmth, birdsong, and the act of moving her body were all reminders that life was good. Despite the fact that some of Lisa's connections had deteriorated throughout the years she had spent attempting to, so that her marriage will remain intact. She found solace in the fact that she was not alone in her struggles, even from those who had previously seemed aloof. As she opened up about her struggles, they were there to listen, comfort her when she couldn't speak, and rejoice in her progress toward recovery. The process of healing took time. Lisa would have moments of strength and readiness to welcome her new life, and then she would be knocked down by the weight of her losses. When she thought about her past and the hopes and goals that would never materialize, she would have a particularly hard time celebrating holidays, birthdays, and anniversaries. Lisa made the conscious decision to press on through the tough times, so that she may grieve and heal at the same time. Lisa learned to forgive as a powerful step in her healing path. Forgiving Doug seemed like an insurmountable task at first. It stung way too much. Profound, the treachery too recent, and the anguish too tangible. However, Lisa started to realize that forgiving Doug wasn't about absolving him of duty. Breaking free of the bitterness that had been burdening her was the main goal. She failed to rationalize his decisions or act as if it was all right. But she decided to let go of the anger, so it wouldn't hold her back anymore. A weight lifted off Lisa's shoulders as she extended her forgiveness. She had had enough of letting her identity and actions be defined by Doug. For the rest of her life, she hoped her trust, her resilience, and the love that remained in her. Once again, she gave herself permission to fantasize about a future where she was content, fulfilled, and at peace with herself and the world. Lisa also started telling people about her experience after understanding it may be a voice for women who felt invisible in their own struggles. Lives. She continued her practice of quietly conversing with those going through tough times, speaking to women's groups, and writing online. She told a hopeful story, not one of bitterness. In her words, "You are not alone," and she emphasized that healing was possible even after the most profound betrayal, and their grief did not define them. Lisa discovered on her path that healing isn't about erasing memories, but rather about paying tribute to them while making the conscious decision to go ahead. She discovered that it was normal to experience sadness, hurt, and recognize the sorrow while holding on to the hope that brighter times were on the horizon. Being a wife, financially sustaining a ministry, or maintaining a certain public image were not her measure of value, she realized. Beyond everything she had lost, her value rested in her identity as a woman made and loved by God. There was no unexpected triumph or miraculous recovery on Lisa's road to recovery. It was about being strong in silence, making decisions every day, and gently picking up the pieces of a life that had been shattered. It was about rediscovering her love for herself, settling into the here and now, and having faith in what the future holds. May still be decent. Seeing herself reflected in the mirror now, Lisa realizes that she is a stronger woman for having survived the fire. She observes a strong, independent lady who has broken free from the past and is now telling her own story. Hope doesn't exist because everything is ideal. Rather, it stems from her will to persevere, believe, and love despite the many obstacles that threaten to shatter her. When it seems like everything has crumbled around you, Lisa's path to recovery shows that it is possible to pick yourself up and keep going. This is a tale of perseverance, trust, and the subtle strength that comes from deciding to mend regardless of the time it takes.